June 25, 1876. A golden-haired general rides straight into hell. But his worst enemy wasn't the warriors waiting for him. It was his own arrogance. 15 mistakes, 15 deadly choices, from refusing machine guns, to attacking at high noon, to ignoring the scouts begging him to turn back. This is how George Custer actually died, not as a hero, but as a warning. But before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel to help support our community. June 1876. The Montana plains stretched tall with grass, the rivers thin and sluggish, and the man who had once ridden triumphantly through the Civil War now galloped toward infamy, straight into one of America's most devastating military failures. His name was George Armstrong Custer, a golden-haired general turned myth, a man starving for glory yet oblivious to ruin. But Custer wasn't felled solely by arrows and bullets. He was destroyed by his own choices, 15 lethal errors cascading like falling dominoes, each sealing his fate. First, misjudging the enemy's strength. They couldn't possibly outmatch us. Could they? Custer had received warnings, repeated ones, of a vast native encampment near the Little Bighorn. Yet to him, vast meant hundreds, perhaps 1,000 warriors, not thousands. When his Crow and Arikara scouts crested a ridge overlooking the valley, they halted in dread. Below sprawled an immense gathering, over 10,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, with as many as 3,500 warriors. The scouts pleaded with Custer to turn back. One scout even stripped off his military uniform and donned his tribal dress, a silent omen of impending doom. But Custer dismissed it. If there are that many, he scoffed, then the entire Sioux nation is camped there. He assumed it was a ruse. It wasn't. This wasn't just a clash. It was the greatest native force ever amassed on American land, and Custer rode in blind. Second, splitting his army in hostile territory. Divide and be conquered, Sun Tzu warned. Divide your foe to crush him. Custer did the reverse. He fractured his forces in enemy lands. With no accurate maps and no fresh intel on the village's size, he carved his regiment into 3. Major Reno would assault the southern edge. Captain Benteen would sweep the left flank. Custer, leading the last 210 men, would charge from the north. But the strategy had a deadly weakness: separation. The units were scattered miles apart, with no way to communicate except fragile couriers on horseback. If one group faced attack, the others couldn't reinforce them. And they did face attack. Reno's troops were torn apart. Benteen drifted without direction. Custer, isolated, encircled, overpowered. History labels it a tactical maneuver. In truth, it was a death sentence. Third, dismissing his native scouts, the men who tried to stop the disaster. The Crow and Arikara weren't just allies. They were seasoned plainsmen. They understood Sioux and Cheyenne tactics, how they fought, how they rallied before battle. When they spotted smoke from countless lodges and warriors daubing their faces for war, they raised the alarm. "Too many," one scout urged. "You can't win. Wait for backup." Another begged him to delay and summon General Terry's reinforcements. But Custer called them liars. He mocked their courage, spat on their loyalty. "The 7th Cavalry doesn't retreat," he snarled. The scouts stripped off their military uniforms, bracing for the end. They fought to save him. He refused to listen, and he rode in with 210 men. Fourth, refusing Gatling guns and backup. Who needs firepower when you've got fame? Before the campaign, Custer was offered Gatling guns, early machine guns that could unleash 350 rounds a minute. They were cumbersome, yes, but lethal in a fight. He refused. Too sluggish, he claimed. They'd delay the advance. He also spurned extra infantry from General Terry. More soldiers meant sharing glory. Custer wanted speed, a solo triumph. Yet at Little Bighorn, it was the native warriors who held the advantage, armed with Winchester repeaters, Spencer carbines, and a forest of arrows and spears. The man who scorned machine guns now faced an indigenous army with superior weapons and overwhelming numbers. The Gatlings gathered dust in camp. Custer's remains would soon litter the Montana prairie. Fifth, charging blind. He had no idea where he was, but he attacked anyway. The land around Little Bighorn was a tangle of ravines, bluffs, and gullies, perfect for ambushes, a nightmare for cavalry. Yet Custer didn't scout it. He didn't survey the ridges. He saw smoke, saw the lodges, and plunged ahead. That choice doomed his men. Trapped between unscalable cliffs, uncrossable rivers, and warriors who knew the ground like their own breath, Custer's troops stumbled blindly. The natives moved like shadows, striking from land they'd known since birth. They weren't just outnumbered, they were outmaneuvered by the earth itself. And Custer had delivered them to it. Sixth, striking at the worst moment. Who attacks in broad daylight? Any veteran of the Indian Wars knew one rule. You strike at dawn. He attacked at high noon, when warriors were alert, armed, and waiting. Dawn assaults catch enemies groggy and unprepared. But Custer? He struck in glaring sunlight, hours after the village had spotted his approach. By the time gunfire erupted, Cheyenne and Lakota war parties were already mobilized, scouts positioned, battle lines formed. This wasn't an ambush. It was a declaration of war. Picture jamming a spear into a beehive at midday while wearing clanging armor. That was Custer's strategy. Seventh, expecting the warriors to scatter. They'll break when we charge. They didn't. Past battles had poisoned Custer's instincts. At the Washita River in 1868, he'd raided a smaller Cheyenne camp, slaughtering warriors and civilians alike. Survivors fled, so he assumed Little Bighorn would repeat history. Panic, disarray, retreat. Instead, he faced fury. This wasn't just any encampment. It was Sitting Bull's united front, a gathering of tribes who'd vowed no more running. When Custer charged, they didn't retreat. They engulfed him. He'd confused tactics for weakness, warriors for prey. It was the final error he'd lived to regret. Eighth, weaponizing women and children. Capture the families, and the men will yield. The opposite occurred. Custer's plan to flank the village and seize civilians, a brutal tactic he'd used successfully before, backfired catastrophically. This time, it ignited a single burning purpose in every warrior: defend them. Kill the invaders. As Custer's troops attempted to flank the village from the north, they weren't met with retreat, but a tidal wave of warriors thundering toward them like a wildfire. His cruel gamble had exploded in his face. You don't corner men who've lost everything, their land, their families, their freedom. You ignite them, and Custer had no clue what fury he'd awakened. Ninth, throwing Reno into the slaughter alone. Reno, you lead the charge. Good luck. Custer commanded Major Marcus Reno to attack the southern end of the village with 140 men, assuring him the rest would follow. But as Reno closed in, the horrifying truth struck him. This was no small camp. It sprawled endlessly. Within moments, warriors poured out, encircling Reno's troops. Chaos swallowed them. Horses shrieked. Bullets ricocheted off the bluffs. Reno, overwhelmed, ordered a desperate retreat into the riverside timber, where half his men were butchered or left stranded. Custer never came. Benteen was nowhere near. Reno had been fed to the wolves with no hope of rescue. 10th. The useless panicked note to Benteen: "Big village, hurry," words that meant nothing. After radio silence from Benteen, Custer scrawled a rushed message: "Benteen, come fast, big village, bring packs." That was it. No coordinates, no strategy, no urgency. Benteen, already bogged down by brutal terrain, was further delayed by the pack train hauling vital ammo and medical supplies. By the time he read the note, he had no idea where Custer was, how dire the situation had become, or just how big that village really was. Benteen delayed. By the time he moved, Custer's entire force had been annihilated. In warfare, clear communication means survival. Custer's vague note was like shouting into a tornado. 11th. Selecting disastrous terrain for his last battle. The peaceful slopes above Little Bighorn today, just grass swaying in the breeze, became a slaughterhouse in June 1876. When Custer recognized his encirclement, he rallied his men to the ridges now called Last Stand Hill. But this wasn't tactical high ground. The position was completely exposed, narrow crests with no protection from gunfire. The surrounding gullies, perfect for ambushes, teemed with warriors. His chosen battlefield offered no defense, no sightlines, no retreat. His soldiers formed desperate circles, firing wildly at mounted warriors attacking from all sides. Custer had marched them into a death pit, and the enemy poured in like floodwaters. Some troopers tried to flee, others dismounted for brutal close combat. None survived. Custer's last stand wasn't just a battle, it was the culmination of his myth-making. He wasn't simply fighting for victory, he was battling for eternal fame. This engagement, he believed, could propel him to Congress, perhaps even the White House. He raced to beat General Terry to the fight, hungry for glory, newspaper headlines, his portrait in the Capitol. So he dismissed warnings, refused reinforcements, and charged ahead, not for tactical advantage, but for legend. Even as his command crumbled, history records no retreat orders, no fallback positions, no tactical adjustments. As his men fell around him, Custer clung desperately to his delusion of victory. He didn't just die fighting. He perished, clinging to his delusion. The 7th Cavalry wasn't merely overpowered, they were completely disconnected. Reno was in full retreat. Benteen was immobilized. The supply train lagged miles behind. And Custer he commanded in total isolation. No communication lines, no synchronized movements, no grasp of the battlefield. A handful of couriers raced through kill zones, some shot mid-ride, others vanishing forever. While Sitting Bull's forces coordinated with signals and scout networks across the ridges, the U.S. Army was operating blind. When Benteen finally linked with Reno's shattered troops, they listened desperately for Custer's orders. Only silence answered, not just ominous but absolute. 14th, no exit strategy, no alternatives, fight or die, that constituted the entire battle plan. Competent generals prepare for setbacks. Custer refused. No secondary positions, no defensive perimeter, most damningly, no retreat protocol. Convinced of invincibility, he made survival impossible. No medical wagons, no reserve supplies. Soldiers carried only what fit in saddlebags. When the bullets flew, it became victory or annihilation. Ultimately, annihilation. The massacre concluded in 120 minutes. No prisoners taken, no living witnesses from Custer's battalion. The northern detachment was obliterated so thoroughly it might never have existed. 15th, paralysis as disaster unfolded. War demands adaptability. When plans fail, leaders must improvise. But Custer? He watched his strategy disintegrate and remained rigid. As warriors closed in from all sides, as his lines collapsed, as defeat became inevitable, he kept charging forward into the myth he'd created until that myth became his grave. When Reno's forces crumbled, he abandoned them. When Benteen went dark, he never sought him. When faced with the village's true scale, he charged regardless. Every possible alternative existed, waiting for Terry's main force, consolidating his troops, scouting defenses, establishing fallback positions. He rejected them all. This wasn't a general's campaign, it was a man sprinting toward his own legend. By the time reality pierced his delusion, the noose had already tightened. Rifles cocked, warriors closed ranks, and Custer was moments from becoming immortalized, not as a hero, but as a warning. The aftermath spoke in terrible silence. Custer, his brothers, his nephew, his brother-in-law, 260 soldiers, their corpses sprawled across the hillside, stripped, defiled, whitening under the merciless sun, black with flies. Only the myth remained pristine, the noble last stand. But the brutal truth? The warriors didn't defeat Custer. Custer defeated Custer. 15 catastrophic errors, each compounding the last until no one remained to pay the price. A symphony of arrogance where every note was fatal. Custer's bones would bleach on that hill. His legend would burn brighter than ever. But the truth? He wasn't defeated by warriors, or bad luck, or fate. He was outmaneuvered by his own pride, outgunned by his own arrogance, and in the end, the only thing left standing was the lesson. If you learned something today, leave a comment with one word. Remember.